I didn't remember anything before that day. Nothing at all. I didn't even remember my name. When I came to, I found myself in a hospital. Around me were white walls, sterile smells of antiseptics, and the quiet but insistent beeping of monitors. My body felt alien. Every movement was difficult, as if I had been under pressure. My chest was constricted by a tight bandage. My left arm was in plaster, and something was digging into my right, probably in 4. The first thing I felt, besides pain, was a strange feeling of emptiness. I couldn't recall a face, or events, or even my own reflection. It was white noise enveloping my mind. I closed my eyes, hoping to feel for at least a moment that this was just a bad dream. But reality was much more insistent. I was pulled out of this strange stupor by a man in a white coat. His face was serious, but not sullen, more focused, as if he was considering what to say. I heard him explain what had happened: a car accident, a hit on the side of a car. Severe head trauma, he said, probably temporary amnesia. The word temporary gave me a faint hope, but at the same time gave me no certainty. I was an empty vessel, and I had to figure out who I had been before everything ended. The doctor left as quickly as he had appeared, and I was left alone in the room. This fact did not surprise me. Solitude did not seem unusual. It was familiar, as it seemed to me. Despite the memory loss, for some reason I knew that there was no one in my life who would sit next to me now, worry, hold my hand. After some time, the door opened again. This time a man in a formal dark gray suit entered the room. He looked like he had been cut out of a glossy magazine about business success. Tall, confident, with a perfectly matched tie and charcoal shoes that sparkled in the sun coming through the window. He was holding a tablet in his hands and studying it carefully as he walked towards my bed. He stopped, looked up, and said a few words. I didn't know what to make of it. This man was claiming to be my personal assistant and that, in fact, I was his boss. A millionaire, the head of a large company. Even in my state, I felt the statement echoing in my head like an absurdity. Me? A millionaire? The head of a company? How was that even possible? But the assistant spoke confidently. His words sounded like an established fact. He told me that the accident had happened on the way to a business meeting. My daily routine was planned down to the minute, and according to him, I preferred to work alone. No family responsibilities, no children, no distractions, he said. You've always lived like this. As he spoke, I tried to cling to every detail, as if they might shed light on who I was. He explained that I had built my company from scratch, that my reputation had always been impeccable, but rather harsh. My subordinates feared me. My competitors respected me. I rarely appeared in public, preferring to avoid attention. Each of his words sounded like a death sentence. This person he was describing was a stranger to me. I couldn't imagine myself like this. Maybe it was because of the amnesia, or maybe because I simply didn't want to be this. On the other hand, how could I deny anything when I couldn't remember anything from my life? The assistant assured me that he would take care of everything. I had resources, doctors who would do everything possible to restore my memory. However, he noted that it would take time. His voice was even, almost too even, as if he was used to these dry reports. There was a faint trace of weariness in the depths of his eyes, as if he knew that he had a long and difficult journey ahead of him, connected with me. When he left, leaving the tablet on the nightstand, I was alone again. And this loneliness this time covered me like a heavy blanket. I looked at my hands, and it seemed strange to me that these hands might have held the steering wheel of the car that crashed. These hands created something for which I was respected or hated, but I could not remember a single moment. There were photographs on the tablet, portraits of people in offices, views of the city from above, interiors of offices. In some of the pictures, I was there. Formal suit, stern gaze, arms folded across my chest. The face that the assistant said was mine looked alien. I studied it, trying to catch at least some hint of familiarity, but all was in vain. The day was drawing to an end. Through the window, I watched the light gradually fade, giving way to the grayness of the evening. In this silence, I suddenly realized that the memory might not return. I might have to start over. But who am I now? Am I the person I was in the past, or the person I will become? The feeling of emptiness gave way to a slight anxiety. Starting a new path is always alarming, especially when you don't know where you came from. The next few days in the hospital passed in a fog. Nurses came and went, taking blood pressure, checking bandages and IVs. Their every movement was practiced but mechanical, as if they were not serving a person, but just another patient. This did not worry me. On the contrary, it even calmed me. The silence and routine gave me time to collect my thoughts, although I had few of them. On the third day, I dared to get out of bed for the first time. It turned out to be more difficult than I expected. My legs buckled, my chest ached, and the plaster cast on my arm added to the discomfort. Nevertheless, I felt a strange satisfaction standing at the window of the ward. There, through the glass, a view of the city opened up. The tall buildings glittered in the sunlight, as if they wanted to show off their superiority, but it all seemed distant and alien to me. I couldn't remember a single detail of the landscape. Even the horizon looked like a set, not something familiar. A few hours later, my assistant showed up in the ward. He brought me clothes, comfortable shoes, and documents. Among them was my passport. I looked at the photograph for a long time. The man in it was stern, reserved, with a cold look in his gray eyes. In place of the signature was a name, Michael Rowland. My name. I repeated it to myself several times, as if checking how it sounded, but it didn't evoke any emotion. Just words. The assistant began to tell me about my company, about those who worked there, about my responsibilities. It was information devoid of warmth. There was not a single word about friendship or support in his stories. Everything he said boiled down to numbers, decisions, money. He tried to be polite, but I sensed that there was something more behind that mask, perhaps regret or weariness. According to him, I always kept everyone at a distance. Intimacy was alien to me. In the team, I was a figure who was both intimidating and respected. Subordinates preferred to avoid personal conversations with me, and that suited me. At the end, he left me another folder. It contained my photos, business meetings, conferences, pictures with big businessmen. I saw myself standing behind a podium, shaking hands, but none of these images evoked memories. I did not recognize myself. After he left, I was alone again. Loneliness no longer seemed neutral. It took shape, became something tangible, like a shadow watching my every move. I picked up the tablet left by my assistant and began to leaf through its contents. There were presentations, documents, emails. All this proved that I really was who he described me as. But at the same time, I realized how alien this life was to me. At some point, I found a folder with photographs of landscapes. There were mountains, the sea, forests. Some of the pictures showed a lonely house on the shore of a lake. For some reason, these images evoked a strange feeling in me. They were filled with a calmness that I could not associate with the person my assistant described. Perhaps in this house, I found solitude that life in the city did not provide. I started asking myself, what kind of person was I really? Why did I choose this life? Everything I learned about myself painted an image of a successful but cold businessman who was more interested in reports than human relationships. But a person is not born like that. What made me so withdrawn? What made me isolate myself from others? The next day, I was discharged from the hospital. An assistant met me at the entrance, brought a comfortable black sedan, and took all the medical papers. I felt like a passenger in my own life. The car sped smoothly along the roads, and I looked at the flashing buildings, trying to find something in this city that would seem familiar to me. But the city remained silent. We drove up to a tall skyscraper. This was the office of the company I supposedly ran. The assistant led me through a hall with shiny marble floors and strict architectural lines. The looks of the employees we passed were different. Some looked at me with respect, some with apprehension, and some simply avoided eye contact. I knew these were people I worked with, but their faces didn't evoke a single glimmer of memory. I was led into my office. It was a spacious office with a panoramic view of the city. The walls were decorated with minimalist paintings. Neat stacks of papers lay on the table, and in the corner stood a globe made of rare wood. Everything here screamed status, but nothing said anything about the person who used this office. This place was like an exhibition hall, not a workspace. I sat down at the table and opened the folder in front of me. It contained reports that needed to be studied. I realized that my mind was working on autopilot. I understood the numbers, graphs, tables, but I was not interested in what was behind them. This was work that had become a part of me, even if I did not remember anything. But the question remained, why? The next day, I asked my assistant to take me to the house on the lake whose photos I had seen. He was surprised, but said nothing. The drive was long, but as I got closer, I felt something inside me come alive. The house stood in a secluded place, surrounded by thick trees. It looked as if no one had visited it for a long time. I went inside. The smell of dust and wood filled my nostrils. Everything inside was simple but cozy. Wooden furniture, a fireplace, books on the shelves. This place was so different from my office that it seemed as if it belonged to a completely different person. On the mantelpiece stood a photograph. It was me. I was standing at this same house, looking into the distance, but in the picture I was not wearing a strict business suit, but simple clothes. There was more softness, more life on this face. I spent the whole day there, just wandering around the house, studying every corner. This place seemed closer to me than anything I had seen in these days. Perhaps this was where the person I had lost was. Perhaps I would find the answers here. The house by the lake seemed to be drawing me in. Every object, every detail in it seemed to be filled with some unspoken meaning. I felt that here, among these dusty walls and old books, lay the key to understanding who I was. This house was mine, but it was abandoned. A strange feeling filled me when I looked at the shelves with books and photographs in which I looked completely different, more alive, even, perhaps, happier. A small drawer on a bedside table in one of the bedrooms caught my eye. It was locked, but the lock looked fragile. But I couldn't find the keys, so I simply pressed hard on the lid. The hinges gave way with a creaking sound, and the lid swung open. Inside, I found a stack of old letters, tied with a thin ribbon. The letters were neatly folded, and the paper seemed worn, as if they had been read dozens of times. These were not business notes, but something much more personal. The first letter began with the salutation, Michael. The handwriting was elegant, almost calligraphic. Reading each line gave me a vague feeling of déjà vu. The author of the letters wrote about the past, about a place that I recognized from the description, this house by the lake. He recalled evenings by the fireplace, walks in the woods, conversations that lasted until dawn. But nowhere was there any mention of who this person was. The author's name did not appear in any of the letters. When I got to the third letter, the tone changed. The author began to mention the conflict that was flaring up between us. I didn't want to listen, didn't want to meet him halfway. These words were filled with bitterness, but there was also some sadness in them. The last letter from the stack broke off in the middle of a sentence, as if it hadn't been finished. Why wasn't it sent? And who was this person who wrote to me? These questions swarmed in my head, but there were no answers. After reading the letters, I sat by the window for a long time, looking at the calm surface of the lake. Reflections of trees and clouds trembled on its surface, as if nature was playing some of its own riddles. I tried to imagine who this person was, whose words sounded so sincere. Was it love? Friendship? Someone I betrayed or abandoned? This house seemed to be keeping a secret, but it didn't want to reveal it so easily. By evening, I began to notice another strange detail. In the attic of the house was an old workspace, a desk with a dusty laptop, a stack of scribbled notebooks next to it. The first thing I did was grab the notebooks. They contained notes about my projects, but the handwriting was not like the letters. It was my handwriting, fast, sweeping. There were ideas for a company, business plans, but it all seemed empty and mechanical. One notebook was ruined. Its pages were wet and stuck together. But on the last sheet you could make out the phrase, "Find meaning beyond work." I turned on the laptop. It started with a little difficulty, but it worked. Old files and documents appeared on the screen. Among them was a folder called Lake House. When I opened it, I saw photos, videos, and text notes. The video showed me reading a book by the fireplace, absent-mindedly looking out the window at the lake. The footage was so casual that I could hardly believe it was me. But one video stood out. It was longer than the others, and judging by the date, it was recorded just a couple of months before the accident. I pressed play. The camera was mounted on a tripod, and in the frame I was sitting at a table in the same house. My face was tired, but my voice was firm. I was talking to someone who was off camera. My words were about how I could no longer go on like this, that a life filled only with work was suffocating me. I forgot who I am, I said at some point. These words sounded so painful that I involuntarily looked away from the screen. Then a voice from off camera was heard. It was soft, but full of determination. This voice was saying that I had a chance to change everything, if only I wanted it. The camera swung, and a figure appeared in the frame. It was a woman. Her face was partially hidden by hair, and the lighting did not allow me to make out her features, but she looked at me with some strange mixture of hope and anxiety. Who is she? Why don't I remember her? I tried to play the video again, but the file was corrupted. After a few seconds of playback, the screen froze and the program closed. This left me with even more questions. Why was this woman so important? Why did her voice sound like it was part of my past that I didn't want to let go of? When I returned to the living room, my gaze was caught by an old wooden box near the fireplace. It looked as if it had been touched recently. A thin layer of dust had been rubbed off the lid. I went closer and opened it. Inside was an antique pocket watch. It looked expensive, but simple. On the back was an inscription engraved, "For those who seek time to live." These words stirred something in me. They seemed familiar to me, but I could not remember where I had heard them. I held the watch in my hands, listening to its soft ticking. The feeling that I was standing on the threshold of something important filled me with every second. That night turned out to be restless. I could not fall asleep, wandering around the house and studying everything that came to hand. The feeling of a mystery, unsolved and enticing, seemed to envelop me. The answers seemed so close, but I couldn't reach them. In the morning, I decided that I couldn't remain in the dark any longer. Something in this house, in these letters and notes, hid the truth about me, and I was ready to find out, no matter what it took. The morning brought clarity, but also a certain heaviness. It was that moment when the silence becomes too loud, and the air seems saturated with tension. I woke up early, feeling that something was about to happen. The house, despite all its emptiness, seemed to breathe life. Light filtered through the old curtains, drawing shadows on the floor, and I felt that the answers were somewhere nearby. I only had to reach out. I returned to the letters. I reread each of them, trying to find at least some hint of who this woman was, whose face flashed in the video. She wrote about the house, about our conversations, about how I always immersed myself in work, as if trying to escape from something. One of the letters said that I could never find the balance between success and happiness, and it made us both unhappy. It sounded like a reproach, but not an angry one, more like a plea for me to stop. But one letter stood out. It was tucked away at the very bottom of the stack, barely noticeable. Its paper was more worn and the ink was slightly smudged, as if someone had written in a hurry or while crying. The letter contained only a few lines. "Michael, if you're reading this, it means I've already left. You promised me that one day you'd find time. For us, for yourself. If that time has come, you know where to find me." The words seared themselves into my consciousness. Who was she? Where had she gone? Why couldn't I remember any of this? I felt like I was on the verge of a solution, but it was slipping away like fog over a lake. I decided to look around the house again. Something in it held the answer. I knew it. I wandered through the rooms, touching things that might have been mine, but were completely foreign. In the attic, I came across the laptop again. It turned out to be more important than I had imagined. Among the files hidden in a deep folder, I found a document. The inscription on the file read, "For Michael, when ready." It was an archive containing dozens of videos. They were all from the lake house. The first recordings seemed happy, moments when I laughed, cooked dinner, talked by the fireplace. But then everything began to change. I began to notice how in the videos I was increasingly sitting alone. The woman, whose figure sometimes appeared in the frame, was there less and less. In the last video, she was sitting opposite me. She said something, but the sound was damaged. However, I understood from her face that this was a farewell conversation. After this video, the archive ended, and then I noticed that the last files were recorded a few days before the accident. This caused a strange feeling. Why did everything end at this moment? I returned to the letters. The instruction, "You know where to look for me," did not give me peace. I began to look for something that could be a key to this mysterious place. Among the things I found an old map of the area. Several points were marked on it. One of them was on the other side of the lake, in a hard-to-reach area. I decided that I had to go there. The road was long and difficult. I walked through a dense forest, using a map and rare signs as my guide. This place seemed untouched by time. When I reached the point indicated on the map, a small wooden house opened up before me. It looked abandoned, but there were 2 cups of tea on the porch, as if someone was waiting for a guest. I opened the door. Everything inside was clean and tidy, as if someone had lived here before. There were photographs on the walls, but none of them were familiar. However, in the corner of the room, I found another note. It read, "Michael, if you are here, it means you have found yourself. But the real solution awaits you in your own heart. Everything you are looking for has long been with you." These words made me freeze. They sounded like a message that I had left for myself. At that moment, I realized that everything I was looking for was not in letters, not in things, and not in memories. It was all inside me. And then I realized something unexpected. All this time, I hadn't been looking for a woman or answers to who I was. I had been looking for myself. The lake house, the letters, the photographs, all of it was an attempt to remind me that my life had always been more than just a job. This place was not only home, but also a symbol of the freedom I had lost. When I stepped outside, the sun was already setting. I felt a strange relief. Perhaps my memory would never return. Perhaps I would never know all the details of my life. But it didn't matter anymore. I knew that a new chapter lay ahead of me, and I was ready to begin it.